The lawyer's voice echoes in the silent, dimly lit mansion, each word heavy as stone. The family sits in a perfect row, their faces pale, tense, some biting their lips, others hiding behind fake tears. A few can barely contain their greedy smirks, already imagining the fortune about to be theirs. On the table, a large framed photo of the billionaire sits draped in black cloth, a single candle flickering beside it. The room feels colder by the second. Then a sound cuts through the tension. Tap, tap, tap. A cane strikes the marble floor from the hallway. All heads snap toward the doorway. A tall shadow stretches into the room. The family freezes. And then he steps in. The billionaire, alive. Gasps fill the air. A glass shatters. Someone faints. Before anyone can speak, we cut to black. Before we continue, please kindly hit the subscribe button so that you will not miss true life stories like this. Nup Stories always have an emotional and irresistible story for you. The Marshall estate looms over the rolling hills on the outskirts of the city, its sprawling gardens lit by the faint glow of moonlight. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere is quiet. Almost too quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a heavy weight pressing on your chest. Edward Marshall sits alone in his study, a room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound books and expensive art. The fireplace crackles faintly, but he doesn't seem to notice. His chair, a deep leather armchair that has molded perfectly to his frame over the years, faces the largest window in the house. Beyond the glass, the city skyline glitters like a field of diamonds. His reflection stares back at him. Tired eyes, streaks of silver in his hair, a face that looks older tonight than it did yesterday. I can buy anything in this world, except knowing who truly loves me. Edward Marshall is a man who has everything most people dream about. A multi-billion-dollar business empire, luxury cars, vacation homes scattered across the world, and a name that commands respect in every social circle. But at this moment, none of it matters. He isn't thinking about boardroom deals or new acquisitions. He's thinking about his family. He picks up a crystal tumbler from the table beside him and swirls the dark amber liquid inside. The ice has melted long ago, leaving it watered down, a sign that he's been sitting there, lost in thought, for quite some time. Across the room, a large portrait of his late wife hangs above the fireplace. Her gentle smile almost seems to mock him tonight. She was the glue that once kept this family together. Ever since she passed, Edward has felt the threads unravel. His thoughts drift to his children, James, Claire, and Ryan. James, 35, the ambitious son. James, the eldest, was always the responsible one growing up. He followed in Edward's footsteps, joining the family company straight out of college. Edward had been proud at first, seeing him in those crisp suits, talking numbers and strategy. But somewhere along the way, James stopped looking at Edward as a father and started seeing him as an obstacle, the man standing between him and full control of the empire. Edward remembers their last conversation. "Dad, you can't keep holding on to the company forever. The board is ready for fresh leadership. I am ready." Edward had smiled, masking the sting those words carried. Ready? Maybe. But James's eyes hadn't been on Edward. They'd been on the power, the money, the legacy. Claire, 33, the compassionate daughter. Claire was different, sweet, thoughtful, and quiet. She had chosen a life outside the family business, working as a school teacher. Edward admired her independence, though he worried about her constant financial struggles. She never asked for help, never asked for anything. But Edward wasn't blind. He saw the overdue bills on her kitchen counter the last time he visited. He saw the worry lines around her eyes when she thought no one was looking. She was the only one who still hugged him without hesitation, still called him just to talk, still laughed at his old jokes even when they weren't funny. If there was one child Edward believed might truly care about him beyond the money, it was Claire. Ryan, 28, the reckless youngest. And then there was Ryan, the baby of the family. Spoiled, reckless, wild. Ryan had been given every opportunity. Private schools, Ivy League education, internships handed to him on a silver platter. But he had thrown most of them away. Instead of running a company, he ran up credit card bills. Instead of attending board meetings, he attended parties that lasted until sunrise. Edward had bailed him out more times than he could count. Unpaid debts, bad investments, tabloid scandals. And still, Ryan hadn't changed. Edward sets the glass down with a soft clink and exhales slowly, The truth gnaws at him like a splinter under the skin. He doesn't know if his children love him, or just love what he provides. Birthdays have become less about spending time together, and more about what expensive gift he can give. Holidays feel like business meetings. Even simple dinners end with someone asking for just a little financial help. He rubs his temple and whispers almost to himself, "What happens when I'm gone? Will they cry for me or for the money?" The question lingers in the air. A quiet revelation. The grandfather clock chimes in the corner of the room, pulling Edward out of his thoughts. Midnight. He stands, slowly walking to the window, placing one hand on the cold glass. The city looks alive, millions of lights blinking in the darkness. Somewhere out there, strangers are laughing, loving, living real lives. And here he is in his mansion, surrounded by everything money can buy, yet utterly alone. Edward turns back toward his wife's portrait. For the first time in years, he speaks to it.
"Margaret, if only you were here, you would know what to do."
His voice cracks slightly, surprising even him. Then slowly an idea forms, dangerous but irresistible. What if he could find out? What if he could know without a shadow of a doubt who truly cared for him? The thought grows stronger with each passing second. He wouldn't just wonder anymore, he would test them. Edward walks to his desk and picks up the phone. His hand hesitates for a moment, then dials a number he knows by heart. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answers. "Harold, it's me. We need to talk. I want to do something unusual." The lawyer is silent for a moment on the other end, then cautious. "What do you have in mind?" The line rang twice. "Harold speaking."
"Harold, it's me."
Familiar voice
Edward's
on the other
voice
end
was
low, almost grim. There was a pause, then a note of warmth. "Edward, it's late. You don't usually call at this hour. Is everything all right?" Edward let out a slow breath. No, it isn't. I need you to come over. Tonight." There was no hesitation. "I'll be there within the hour." 45 minutes later, Harold stepped into the study, his briefcase in hand. He was in his late 60s, with thinning silver hair and the calm, collected presence of a man who had seen decades of corporate drama. But he had never seen Edward look like this. "Sit," Edward said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. Harold closed the door softly and took his seat. "You look troubled, Edward. What's going on?" Edward didn't answer right away. He poured 2 glasses of scotch from the decanter and handed one to Harold before lowering himself into his own chair. Finally, he spoke. "I want to stage something." Harold's brow furrowed. "Stage something?" Edward nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yes, I want to pretend I'm dying." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Harold leaned back slowly, processing what he had just heard. "That's extreme. Why on earth would you do that?" Edward's fingers curled around his glass. "Because I need to know. I need to know if my children love me, or just what I leave behind. I need to see them as they truly are. Before I go." Harold set his glass down. His tone was cautious now, almost paternal. "Edward, you understand what you're saying, don't you? This could go very wrong. People don't take news like that lightly. You might break your children's trust, permanently." "I've already lost their trust," Edward said bitterly. "If I ever had it. I sit at my own dinner table and feel like a stranger. Every conversation turns back to money, the company, the inheritance. They see me as a bank account, Harold, not as a father." Harold was silent for a long moment. "This is risky," he finally said. "If they discover it was all an act, they might hate you for it." Edward's eyes narrowed. "Then at least I'll know where I stand. I would rather know the ugly truth than live with polite lies." Harold took a deep breath and reached into his briefcase, pulling out a legal pad. "All right. If you're sure about this, we'll need to plan it carefully. It can't just be a rumor, it has to be convincing." Edward nodded, already feeling a strange sense of resolve building inside him. "Convincing enough to show their true colors." Harold began jotting notes. "First," he said, "we'll need a doctor willing to play along. Someone reputable so there's no doubt about the diagnosis." "I'll make the calls," Edward said. "I have people who owe me favors." "Good. Next, we'll need hospital records, admission papers, treatment notes, maybe even a staged hospital visit. We can have you transferred to a private wing where only your children are allowed to visit." Edward's lips curved into a humorless smile. "Yes. Let them see me weak. Let them believe time is running out." Harold hesitated before adding, "We should also prepare a draft obituary, just in case." Edward turned his gaze back to the window. Yes, make it as believable as possible. Let them taste what life would be like without me. Harold's pen paused over the paper. You realize, Edward, that this isn't just a game. People outside your family will believe this. The board, your employees, even the press. There will be consequences. I'm aware, Edward said. His voice was steel now. The company will run without me for a few weeks. It's run without me before. This is more important. And when the truth comes out? Harold asked quietly. Edward turned to face him fully for the first time. Then they will have to decide whether to hate me or thank me. Either way, I will know who they really are. Harold studied him for a long moment before slowly nodding. Very well, I'll have the paperwork and schedule ready by morning. But Edward, once we start this, there's no turning back. Edward downed the last of his drink. I don't want to turn back. As Harold packed up his notes, he gave one final piece of advice. Be careful what you wish for, Edward. When you dig for the truth, you might not like what you find. Edward's eyes hardened, but a flicker of doubt passed over his face as Harold left the room. For a long moment, Edward stood alone again, staring at the portrait of his wife. Whatever happens, he whispered to her, they need to know that love matters more than money. And if I have to scare them to teach them that, so be it. James Marshall, the eldest son. James's office sits on the top floor of a sleek glass skyscraper, overlooking the heart of the city. It's a perfect reflection of the man himself, sharp, polished, intimidating. The camera sweeps across the space, dark mahogany desk, gleaming awards, framed headlines about his business successes. James stands behind the desk, suit jacket perfectly tailored, his tie knotted to perfection. He isn't sitting, he's pacing, phone pressed to his ear. No, 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 James barks, his voice firm. I said I wanted that merger pushed through by end of quarter. If they don't like the terms, we find someone who does. This is business, not charity. He slams the phone down, clearly frustrated. His assistant peeks through the glass door nervously, but one look from James sends her scurrying away. As the room falls quiet again, James exhales, straightening his tie in the reflection of the window. For a moment, his confident mask slips. He looks tired, the kind of tired that no amount of success can fix. The phone rings again. James picks it up impatiently. This had better be good, he says sharply. A calm voice on the other end. Mr. Marshall, this is Harold. I'm afraid I have bad news. Your father's health is failing. He's asked for the family to come home. James stiffens, his jaw tightening. For a moment, no words come out. Finally, he says, I'll be there tonight. He hangs up and stares at the city lights, his reflection in the glass suddenly looking much older. After a long beat, he mutters under his breath, maybe it's finally time. Claire, the heart of the family. Cut to a modest suburban kitchen. The evening light spills through the window, catching dust motes in the air. Claire Marshall, the middle child, sits at a small table littered with envelopes. She carefully opens one, her face tightening as she reads the words, past due. Claire is in her early 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun, wearing an oversized sweater with paint stains on the sleeves. Her life is a stark contrast to James's. No marble floors or glass offices here. Just a cozy, slightly cluttered home that smells faintly of coffee and old books. She sets the bill aside with a sigh and takes a sip of lukewarm tea. In the living room, we see signs of a life filled with quiet struggles, a stack of unpaid utilities, a small whiteboard with lesson plans, and photos of her stent smiling proudly from field trips. The phone on the counter buzzes, startling her. She picks up. Hello? Claire, Harold's voice says gently. It's about your father. His health. It's not good. He wants the whole family home. Her hand tightens around the phone. How bad is it? Harold hesitates. You should come as soon as possible. Claire closes her eyes, her throat tight. I'll be there first thing in the morning. She hangs up slowly and sits back down, staring at the unpaid bills on the table. A tear slips down her cheek, but she brushes it away quickly, as if scolding herself for crying. Ryan, the rebel. The screen cuts to flashing neon lights and pounding music. Ryan Marshall, the youngest of the siblings, is stumbling out of a crowded club. His shirt is half untucked, his hair messy, his expensive watch glinting under the streetlights. He laughs loudly at something a friend says, but the laugh sounds hollow. His friends peel off one by one, disappearing into waiting ride shares, until Ryan is left standing alone on the sidewalk. He pulls out his phone and scrolls through a list of missed calls, all from debt collectors and angry business partners. He curses under his breath and shoves the phone back into his pocket. It buzzes again. He groans and answers. "Who is this?" he says, slurring slightly. "Ryan, this is Harold. Your father's health is failing. He wants you home immediately." Ryan stops walking, suddenly sobered by the words. "My dad?" he asks, as though the concept surprises him. "Yes, he's asking for you." Ryan looks down at the pavement, silent for a long moment. When he finally speaks, his tone is unreadable. "Fine, I'll come." He hangs up, shoving the phone back into his pocket, and looks around as if unsure of what to do next. The club's music fades behind him as he starts walking down the street, his expression darkening. The pull toward home. The screen transitions into a quiet montage. James shutting down his computer and leaving his office late at night, his face grim. Claire packing a small overnight bag, pausing to touch a framed photo of her parents on the mantel. Ryan tossing a duffel bag into the back seat of his car, staring at himself in the mirror before revving the engine. Each sibling is heading back to the family estate, each with their own thoughts, fears, and motivations. 3 children, 3 very different lives. But tonight they are united by a single phone call. None of them know what awaits them at the mansion. None of them know that this visit will test their hearts, their loyalties, and their very souls. The Marshall mansion hasn't felt this alive in years. The crunch of tires on gravel echoes through the still night as 3 cars pull up one by one. The heavy wooden doors creak open, and each sibling steps inside, greeted by the faint smell of furniture polish and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. But despite the familiar surroundings, there's a weight in the air, the kind that makes every footstep sound too loud, every word feel out of place. James' arrival. James is the first to arrive. He walks through the grand foyer with the commanding air of a man used to being in charge, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He doesn't pause to admire the house or its expensive art. He grew up here after all, but there's a flicker of something in his expression, a mix of dread and impatience. "Where is he?" James asks one of the household staff, barely lowering his voice. "In his room, sir," the maid replies softly. James strides toward the sweeping staircase without waiting for anyone to guide him. As he climbs, his hand grips the polished banister tightly. He better not have waited too long, James thinks grimly. There are things that need to be signed, decisions that need to be made. Claire arrives next. She steps out of her modest car and hesitates at the front door for a long moment, taking in the house she hasn't visited in months. Her eyes flick to the windows, to the warm glow of lights inside, and her throat tightens. When the door opens, she offers the maid a polite smile. "Thank you," she whispers, her voice almost catching. Unlike James, she walks slowly down the hall, letting her fingers trail across the walls as though absorbing the memories of her childhood. She notices the vase of fresh lilies on the table, her mother's favorite flower, and tears prick her eyes. Claire's steps are hesitant as she climbs the stairs. She isn't thinking about the company or the inheritance. She's thinking about the man upstairs, the father she remembers reading bedtime stories by this very hallway. Ryan Haradi. Ryan is the last to arrive, his sports car engine roaring before he kills it abruptly. He steps out wearing sunglasses despite the late hour, his shirt collar open, his expression unreadable. When he steps inside, the maid greets him nervously. "Evening, Ryan," she says. He just nods, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Evening." He glances around the mansion, smirking slightly. "Still smells like money in here," he mutters under his breath. But when no one laughs, his smirk fades. He doesn't rush to go upstairs. Instead, he lingers in the hallway, studying the family portraits. In one, he's just a boy on his father's shoulders, grinning wide. For a second, something soft flickers across his face. But it's gone in an instant. The siblings gather outside Edward's bedroom door, the air thick with tension. The butler opens the door quietly. Inside, the room is dimly lit, curtains drawn halfway. Edward lies in the massive bed, his skin pale under carefully applied makeup, his posture frail. Machines beep softly in the corner, completing the illusion of illness. Edward turns his head slowly, a faint smile on his lips. "You came," he says softly. Claire is the first to move. She crosses the room quickly, kneels beside the bed, and takes his hand. "Dad," she whispers, her voice breaking. You look so different." Edward squeezes her hand weakly. "It's just a bad spell, sweetheart," he says gently. "I'm glad you're here." James clears his throat, standing stiffly at the foot of the bed. "We need to talk," he says, not bothering to hide the urgency in his tone. "About the company, about what happens next if—" He trails off, glancing toward Claire. "If things get worse." Edward hides the sting in his chest and nods faintly. "There will be time for that later, James. Tonight I just want to see my children." Ryan finally steps forward, leaning casually against the wall with his hands in his pockets. "Well, Dad," he says with a crooked grin, "if you're gonna go, can I call dibs on the Aston Martin? You know, to remember you by." Claire shoots him a glare. "Ryan!" "What?" "I'm just trying to lighten the mood," he says, smirking, though the joke lands flat. Edward studies Ryan's face quietly, taking in every word, every smirk. Later, the family gathers in the dining room for a late dinner. The long table is set with silver cutlery, but the atmosphere is anything but warm. Edward eats little, playing up his weakness while the siblings interact in strained silence. "So," James begins, breaking the tension, "have you spoken to Harold about updating the will?" Claire nearly chokes on her water. "James, he's sitting right here." "I'm being practical," James says, his tone clipped. "Dad's health is clearly declining. We need to make sure the transition is smooth." Ryan chuckles. Translation: James wants to make sure he gets the big chair before anyone else does. James shoots him a look. "Grow up, Ryan. This isn't about toys." "It's always about toys," Ryan says, grinning. "Just bigger ones now." Back in his room after dinner, Edward sits propped against the pillows, staring into the darkness. His plan is working. He can already see the cracks forming in his children's facades. But part of him aches. This is his family. These are his children. And yet James sees him as a business asset, Ryan as a joke, and Claire as a man slipping away before she's ready to say goodbye. He wonders briefly if he's gone too far, if pretending to be sick is a cruel trick. But then he remembers the last board meeting, where James pressured him to step down publicly, practically salivating at the chance to take over. No, this is necessary, he needs to know. The house is silent after dinner, but silence in the Marshall mansion isn't peaceful. It's heavy, suffocating. The faint ticking of the grandfather clock carries through the halls, each second louder than the last. Edward can't sleep. He sits on the edge of his bed, still dressed, his cane leaning against the nightstand. The dinner conversation plays over and over in his mind. James asking about the will, Ryan joking about cars, Claire looking crushed. His chest tightens. Was this a mistake? He reaches for his cane and slowly makes his way into the hallway, telling himself he just needs a glass of water. But halfway down the stairs, he hears voices. Low, heated. They're coming from the study. Edward's hand grips the banister. He knows those voices anywhere. In the study. James stands near the fireplace, sleeves rolled up, pacing. His tie is loose, his face set in grim determination. Ryan sits in an armchair, legs sprawled out, sipping from a glass of whiskey like he owns the place. "You're not listening to me," James snaps, his voice sharp. "If Dad's condition gets worse, we can't risk the company going leaderless. Someone needs to step up, and it sure as hell isn't going to be you." Ryan smirks lazily. "Oh, here we go again. Big brother saving the day. Tell me, James, do you ever stop thinking about quarterly reports and stock prices?" "This isn't a joke," James barks, slamming his hand against the desk. The sound makes Ryan flinch, but only slightly. James lowers his voice but doesn't soften it. "We have to make sure Dad signs the transition papers, tomorrow, before it's too late." Ryan raises an eyebrow. "Transition papers? You mean the ones that hand everything over to you?" "They don't hand everything over to me," James says through clenched teeth. "They secure the future of the company. Someone competent has to run things. Dad isn't thinking straight right now, he's emotional. We can't risk him making irrational decisions." Ryan leans forward, grinning. "So what you're really saying is, you want the pen in his hand while he's too sick to argue." James glares at him. "Grow up, Ryan. This isn't about me. This is about protecting what he built. You think Dad wants you blowing inheritance money on another yacht?" Ryan's grin fades, replaced by something darker. "And you think Dad wants to see you turn his company into a soulless empire that chews people up and spits them out?" He started that business because he cared about people, James. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that. James steps closer, his voice icy. At least I can keep it running. You'd bankrupt it in 6 months. Ryan stands abruptly, the chair scraping back. For a moment, it looks like he might throw a punch. In the hallway, Edward stands frozen just outside the doorway, hidden in shadow. His heart pounds in his ears. Transition papers before it's too late. He feels the sting of tears, hot and unstoppable. His cane trembles in his hand. He wanted answers, and now he has them. They don't love me. Not really. James just wants the company. Ryan just wants the money. Edward's breath catches in his throat, and he quickly stifles it with his hand. But in the silence of the hallway, even that small sound feels deafening. Back inside, Ryan glances toward the door suddenly, his instincts sharp. Did you hear that? James frowns. Hear what? Sounded like... Ryan steps toward the door, but when he opens it, the hallway is empty. Edward has already retreated, hobbling as fast as his legs can take him, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. Ryan shrugs. Probably the house settling. This place is ancient. But James isn't convinced. He looks uneasy. Keep your voice down. The last thing we need is Dad hearing this. Edward collapses onto the edge of his bed, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shake as he cries. Quietly, like a man who's forgotten how to do it. For all his power, all his money, Edward Marshall has never felt so small. He remembers nights working late in the early days of the company, missing birthday dinners just so he could build something for his kids. He remembers the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the relentless drive to give them a life better than his own. And now this, James plotting to take control, Ryan mocking the situation like it's a game. Edward feels anger rising in his chest, hot and bitter. So that's what I am to them. A signature, a wallet, a name on a will. His hands curl into fists. For the first time in years, the great Edward Marshall feels powerless, and he hates it. The next morning, Edward is quiet at breakfast, his face unreadable. James notices. You look worse today, he says, trying to sound concerned. Edward just nods slightly, sipping his coffee. Ryan strolls in late, humming to himself, clearly hungover. Claire watches both of them suspiciously. What's going on? She asks. Nothing, James says quickly. But Edward's gaze lingers on his sons. It's not the look of a dying man. It's the look of someone who's seen too much and is planning something. Inside, Edward's anger solidifies into resolve. They think they know me. They think they can manipulate me. Well, let's see how they react when the stakes are higher. Let's see who they really are when the will is on the table. He turns to Harold, who has just entered the room. Call everyone, Edward says, his voice steady. Tomorrow night. We read the will. James nearly chokes on his coffee. Already? Yes, Edward says simply. His eyes are cold now. It's time. The mansion is quiet after the tense breakfast. Too quiet. Edward has dismissed the staff early. James has locked himself in the study sending emails. Ryan has disappeared into the guest house with a bottle of something expensive. But Edward cannot sleep. His mind is a storm. Anger, sadness, betrayal all crashing together. He needs air. He pulls on his robe, grabs his cane and slips out through the side door. The garden is still, bathed in silver moonlight. The roses glisten with dew, and the faint sound of crickets fills the night air. For a moment, Edward feels the weight of the mansion lift off his chest. He used to come here often, back when his wife was alive. They'd sit on the bench together, drinking wine, talking about everything and nothing. It was the one place where he felt like more than a businessman. Tonight the bench is not empty. Claire sits there, her shoulders hunched, face buried in her hands. Edward hesitates. He considers going back inside, giving her privacy, but something in the way her shoulders shake pulls him closer. Claire, he says softly. She jumps slightly, wiping her face quickly. Dad, you scared me. Edward lowers himself onto the bench with effort. I couldn't sleep, he says. Thought I'd get some air. Claire nods, staring at the roses. For a long moment, neither of them speak. Finally, Edward says quietly, You've been crying. Claire gives a small, humorless laugh. Guess I'm not as good at hiding it as I thought. Edward studies her face in the moonlight, the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her hands twist in her lap. What's wrong, sweetheart? He asks gently. Claire hesitates, then exhales slowly. It's not just you being sick. It's everything. James and Ryan keep talking about money, about the company. I feel like no one even sees you as a person anymore, just as some inheritance waiting to be divided. Her voice cracks and she looks away. And I hate it. I hate that it's turning us against each other. Edward feels something shift in his chest. You don't care about the inheritance? Claire shakes her head fiercely. No, I don't want your company, Dad. I don't care about the cars or the house. She swallows hard. I just want you. I want my father back. The one who used to read me stories in this very garden. The one who actually came to my piano recitals. I miss him. Edward's throat tightens. He hasn't felt this close to her in years. He reaches over and takes her hand, his voice rough with emotion. Claire, he says, I'm still here. I've made mistakes. God knows I've made mistakes. But I never stopped loving you. Any of you. She looks at him, her eyes glistening. Then why do I feel like we've all been living in separate worlds? Edward doesn't answer right away. The question cuts too deep. Instead, he squeezes her hand and says, maybe it's time I fix that, before it's too late. Claire leans against him, resting her head on his shoulder. For a while, they just sit there in silence, listening to the rustle of the leaves. Edward glances at the roses, noticing one perfect bloom just beginning to open. It reminds him of Claire, still soft, still vulnerable, but strong enough to survive. You know, he says softly, your mother used to say roses grow stronger after the storm. Claire smiles faintly. Maybe that's us, she whispers. Edward feels a small spark of hope, the first real one he's felt in days. Maybe not all is lost. Maybe there's still love here, buried under the greed and fear. As they sit together, Edward makes a silent decision. The will reading will still happen, but maybe it won't just be a test. Maybe it will be a lesson. A chance for them all to see what really matters before it's too late. He glances at Claire, who has drifted into a quiet calm beside him. She looks so much like her mother in this light it almost hurts. I'm proud of you, Edward says suddenly. Claire looks up startled. You are? Yes, Edward says simply. For caring about what really matters, for not letting money turn you into someone you're not. Claire's eyes fill with fresh tears, but this time, they're different. Softer. Thank you, she whispers. Edward kisses her forehead. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember this. You are more than the company, more than the money. You always have been. When Edward finally returns to his room, he feels lighter. The anger from earlier hasn't completely gone. James's cold ambition and Ryan's careless jokes still cut deep. But there's a new warmth in his chest. Claire's words reminded him why he started this whole test in the first place. Not just to expose greed, but to find love. He stands by the window for a long time, staring out at the garden, until the first light of dawn touches the horizon. Tomorrow, everything will change. The next evening, the air in the Marshall mansion feels charged, as though the house itself is holding its breath. The dining room table has been cleared, replaced with folders, papers, and a single heavy envelope. The golden chandelier above throws a warm glow on the polished wood, but it only makes the tension sharper, not softer. Edward sits at the head of the table, draped in a blanket, his cane leaning against his chair. The makeup that makes him look frail seems almost unnecessary tonight. His face is pale from real exhaustion, not just from the act, but from the emotional storm he's been holding inside. Harold, the family's trusted lawyer, stands at the far end, glasses perched on his nose, looking as calm as ever. But Edward notices the way Harold's hands clutch his briefcase just a little too tightly. He understands what's at stake tonight, gathering tension. James sits to Edward's right, scrolling through his phone with the air of someone who wants to get this over with. Ryan slouches across from him, spinning a pen between his fingers, grinning like this is some kind of game. Claire sits near the end of the table, close to her father. Her face is tense, her hands clasped together, as though bracing for an emotional storm she knows is coming. From the hallway comes the sound of heels clicking on the floor, and in walks Victoria, Edward's late wife's sister. Victoria is elegant, expensively dressed, and perpetually judgmental. She never misses a chance to remind the siblings, especially Claire, of who she thinks is worthy of the Marshall legacy. Finally, she says, sweeping into the room and sitting down as if she owns the house. We can get this dreadful business over with. Ryan smirks. Didn't know you were still on Dad's payroll, Aunt V. Victoria glares at him. Don't be flippant, Ryan. Some of us care about preserving this family's name. Right, Ryan says, leaning back. And by preserving, you mean making sure your name stays on the guest list for the Hamptons galas. Claire stifles a laugh, but James shoots Ryan a warning look. Let's just get through this, James says tightly. Harold begins. Harold clears his throat, cutting through the chatter. Ladies and gentlemen, he says in his calm, measured tone, your father has asked me to gather you all here tonight to discuss the state of his estate and the provisions of his will. The words seem to land like stones on the table. Claire glances at Edward, who simply nods. Harold opens his briefcase and begins laying out documents. There are, of course, standard procedures to follow in matters of succession. But before I proceed, let's skip the formalities, James interrupts. Just tell us what's in it. Harold raises an eyebrow. Patience, James. This is not a simple matter. Of course it's simple, James snaps. Dad built this empire. It needs a capable successor, someone who can handle the weight of it. Ryan grins. And let me guess, you mean you. James turns to him, his expression cold. At least I've been running the company for the last 5 years while you've been busy collecting DUIs. Ryan leans forward, his grin vanishing. Careful, brother. At least I don't treat Dad like a walking checkbook. The fight escalates. The argument quickly escalates. I have sacrificed more for this family than anyone here, James says, his voice rising. I've been in the office at 6 a.m. every morning, building this company with Dad. Without me, this place would have collapsed years ago. Sacrificed? Ryan laughs bitterly. You mean you sacrificed Dad's time, his health, and probably his sanity just to squeeze out a few more dollars for the shareholders? Yeah, what a hero. Enough! Victoria snaps. Ryan, you wouldn't know sacrifice if it hit you in the face. You've been nothing but a disgrace since you turned 18. Ryan rolls his eyes. Thanks for the pep talk, Aunt V. Victoria turns her attention to Claire, her lips curling in disdain. And you sitting there all quiet, pretending to be the good one. We all know you've been bleeding this family dry with your little loans and sob stories. You're nothing but a leech, Claire. Always have been. The room goes silent. Claire's face drains of color. She looks like someone just slapped her. I've never, she begins, her voice trembling. Oh, please, Victoria says, waving her hand. We all know you married that worthless musician who left you broke. And now you come crawling back here with your hand out, crying on cue so Daddy keeps bailing you out. Ryan slams his hand on the table. Watch your mouth. James just shakes his head. She's not wrong, Ryan. Claire, you've been irresponsible for years. Maybe it's time you start taking accountability. Claire's lip trembles. She glances at Edward, searching his face for some sign of comfort. Edward's hand grips the arm of his chair so hard his knuckles turn white. Every muscle in his body screams to speak, to defend Claire, to put an end to this cruelty, but he doesn't. He forces himself to stay silent, his jaw tight, tears burning behind his eyes. This is why I'm doing this, he reminds himself. They need to see who they really are. They need to see how far they've fallen. But when Claire looks at him with those tearful eyes, something inside him twists. Claire's stand. Claire pushes her chair back abruptly, standing. You think I want this? She demands, her voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. You think I want to sit here and listen to all of you fight over a man who is still breathing in this room, who has given you everything? Her voice breaks, but she keeps going. I didn't come here for the money. I came here because I love him. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, we could act like a family for once instead of vultures circling a corpse. Her words land like a slap. For a moment no one speaks. Ryan looks away, guilt flashing across his face. James just frowns, uncomfortable. Victoria scoffs, muttering something under her breath. Edward feels tears welling in his eyes, not from sadness this time, but pride. Harold's warning. Harold clears his throat again, his voice calm but firm. If we cannot maintain some civility, I will have to postpone this discussion. The will cannot be read under these conditions. James groans. We can't postpone this forever, Harold. The company is in limbo. The company, Claire spits. It isn't the only thing at stake here. Edward leans back in his chair, staring at the papers on the table but not really seeing them. Inside, he feels a storm building. He has seen his family's worst tonight, their greed, their anger, their cruelty. But he has also seen Claire's strength. For the first time, Edward wonders if this plan, this entire performance, might break them beyond repair. Tomorrow the will would be read, and after that, nothing would ever be the same. The mansion is dark and quiet. The kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like the house is listening. Edward cannot sleep. The day's events keep replaying in his mind. James's cold insistence on the transition papers, Victoria's cruel attack on Claire, and the growing fractures between his children. He sits alone in his study, the fire burning low, his cane resting against the desk. He stares at the old family portraits on the wall, one of him and his late wife with 3 smiling children. When did everything change? A faint creak breaks his thoughts. The sound is coming from the hallway. Edward stiffens, listening. Footsteps, soft, deliberate move toward the office. Edward stands slowly, his hand on the cane. The footsteps stop right outside the study. Then the door handle turns. The door eases open. Ryan steps inside, his phone's flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He doesn't notice Edward sitting in the shadows. He moves straight to the wall safe, crouching down. Edward's pulse quickens. What is he doing? Ryan enters a code quickly, confidently, and the safe clicks open. Looking for something? Ryan freezes. The flashlight swings wildly as he spins around and sees Edward standing there, illuminated by the dim firelight. "Dad!" Ryan blurts, his voice a mix of guilt and panic. Edward steps forward, his expression like steel. "Answer the question." Ryan hesitates, then tries to play it off with a grin. "Relax, old man. I was just—" "Don't lie to me," Edward snaps, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Ryan swallows. For the first time, he looks truly scared. I just needed to borrow some files," Ryan stammers. "I've got this guy, an investor. He said he could help me pay off some debts if I—" Edward's stomach turns cold. "If you what, Ryan?" Ryan's voice drops. "If I gave him information about the company, about the upcoming merger." The room goes dead silent. Edward feels a wave of fury crash over him. "You sold me out?" Ryan flinches. "No, not you, just the company. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" Edward's cane slams against the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You've been feeding confidential information to a rival." Ryan takes a step back. "I didn't have a choice. You don't understand what I owe these people." "Because you were too busy partying and gambling to think about the consequences," Edward roars. Ryan's jaw tightens. "Yeah? Well, maybe if you hadn't spent my whole life treating me like the family screw-up, I wouldn't have had to look for validation somewhere else." Edward's breath catches, but his anger doesn't fade. "This company was supposed to be your legacy," Edward says, his voice low and dangerous. "And you've turned it into a bargaining chip for some thug who slipped you a few $100,000. Ryan's voice cracks. "It wasn't a few $100,000. It was over $1 million. Edward goes very still. $1 million. Company secrets. A rival. Edward suddenly realizes just how far this has gone, and how much damage Ryan may have already caused. His carefully crafted plan, the fake illness, the staged will reading, suddenly feels fragile. Dangerous. If the rival gets wind of his death, they might move to take over the company entirely, leveraging the chaos to swallow up everything he's built. Edward grips the back of his chair, steadying himself. "You've endangered everything," he says quietly. Ryan looks away, shame flickering in his expression. "Dad," Ryan says finally, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I was just trying to get out from under them. You have no idea what it's like owing people like this. They don't just send you letters. They send guys to your door." For a moment, Edward sees not a man but a frightened boy. The same boy who used to sneak into this study at night, asking for help with his math homework. But the image vanishes as quickly as it comes. "This isn't just about you anymore," Edward says, his voice icy. "You've put this entire family at risk." Ryan's eyes glisten. "Then help me, please. Just this once." Edward turns away, staring into the fire. His anger is white-hot, but beneath it is something else. Fear. He had wanted to test his children to see who truly loved him. But now the game has changed. This isn't just about love. This is about survival. If he goes through with the will reading, with the fake death, it could throw the company into chaos. It could open the door for this rival and for Ryan's debtors to destroy everything. And yet, if he cancels the plan now, he'll never know the full truth about where his children's loyalties lie. Edward feels the weight of the choice pressing down on him like a stone. He turns back to Ryan, his expression hard. "You're going to stay away from that rival," Edward says. "You're going to stop leaking information, and you're going to come clean to Harold about everything you've done. Tomorrow." Ryan's mouth drops open. Tomorrow? Are you insane? Edward slams his cane against the desk again. Tomorrow. Ryan's shoulders slump. He nods slowly, defeated. Edward steps closer, his voice soft but dangerous. If you betray this family again, Ryan, I won't protect you next time. Ryan looks at him for a long moment, then turns and walks out, his shoulders hunched. When the door closes, Edward sinks into his chair. His anger drains out of him, leaving behind a hollow ache. He stares at the open safe, at the documents Ryan nearly took. How did it come to this? He wanted this whole charade to teach his children something about love, about what really matters. But now it feels like he's sitting on top of a ticking bomb. If James finds out about Ryan's betrayal, he'll use it to cut Ryan out of the company permanently. If Claire finds out, it might break her heart. And if the rival gets any hint of what's coming, they'll pounce. Edward rubs his temples, exhausted. For the first time since this scheme began, he wonders if he's lost control of his own plan. He knows tomorrow's will reading is no longer just a test. It's a reckoning. And if Ryan's betrayal is only the tip of the iceberg, then by tomorrow night the whole house of cards might come crashing down. The mansion is unnervingly still. Night falls over the estate, the moonlight casting pale streaks across the polished floors. Edward lies in his massive canopy bed, his face pale under expertly applied makeup. His breathing is shallow, labored, the final stage of the performance he has orchestrated. Harold sits quietly in a corner, watching his old friend with worried eyes. Are you sure about this? Harold asks softly. Edward opens his eyes, faintly smirking despite his exhaustion. If I stop now, I'll never know the truth. Moments later, Harold makes the call. James's office. James is pacing, phone in hand, closing a deal over speakerphone. The call comes and Harold's name flashing. He silences the deal call and answers. A long pause. His face falls. He's gone? For a moment, James actually looks shaken. His jaw tightens, his shoulders slump. But before the emotion can settle, he glances at his assistant. Clear my schedule. And call the funeral director. We need to plan this right away. He hangs up, exhales, and mutters under his breath. Let's get this over with. Claire's kitchen. Claire is sitting at her small kitchen table, going through unpaid bills. The phone rings, and she answers with a hopeful, Harold? The words hit her like a bullet. Her face crumples. She sinks into the chair, clutching the phone to her chest. No. Tears spill down her cheeks as she grabs her car keys, heading out the door before Harold can say anything more. Ryan's apartment. Ryan is passed out on the couch, an empty bottle on the table. His phone buzzes and he groggily answers. The news barely registers at first. Then a slow, incredulous grin spreads across his face. He hangs up, throws the phone aside, and lets out a triumphant laugh. Finally, he pours himself another drink, toasting to the empty room. To freedom. Back at the mansion. The next morning, the atmosphere in the mansion is heavy, the air thick with grief, or the appearance of it. Edward lies still in bed, looking like a man at peace. Harold stands nearby, keeping up the ruse as the family arrives one by one. Claire is first. She rushes to the bedroom, tears streaming down her face. She kneels at Edward's bedside, clutching his hand. Oh, Dad, I didn't get to say goodbye, she whispers, pressing her forehead against his hand. Her sobs are raw, uncontrollable, echoing through the quiet room. Harold looks away, guilt flickering across his face. James enters next. He pauses at the door, takes a deep breath, then steps in. He stands over Edward's body, hands clasped behind his back like he's attending a board meeting. I guess this is it, James mutters. Claire glares at him through her tears. That's all you have to say? James's jaw tightens. We need to be practical. There are funeral arrangements to make, legal matters to sort out. Claire stands, fury in her eyes. Our father just died and all you can think about is paperwork? James glares back. Someone has to think about it. You think this company runs itself? The tension hangs thick in the air until Harold steps in. Now is not the time, he says quietly. Let's give him peace. Finally, Ryan stumbles in, still smelling of alcohol. He glances at the bed, smirks, and mutters, Guess the old man really kicked it. Claire's jaw drops. How can you be so heartless? Ryan shrugs. What? He's been half dead for weeks. At least now we can all move on. James snaps, show some respect. Ryan throws his hands up. Respect? Please. He never respected me. He spent my whole life comparing me to you two. Forgive me if I don't cry on command. Claire bursts into fresh tears. Harold steps between them, raising his voice for the first time. Enough, this is not the place. Later, each child retreats to their separate rooms. James sits at Edward's desk, already flipping through company files. We'll hold the reading as soon as possible, he mutters into the phone to Harold. No point delaying. Ryan is in the billiards room, taking shots and dancing to loud music, celebrating like it's New Year's Eve. Claire stays by Edward's bedside long after everyone else leaves. She talks to him softly, as if he can still hear her. Dad, I don't care about the money, I just wish we had more time. I wish you'd known how much I loved you. A single tear lands on Edward's hand. For a second he almost squeezes back, but he doesn't break character. Harold's guilt. That night, Harold checks on Edward in secret. You saw their reactions, Harold says quietly. Was it worth it? Edward opens his eyes, staring at the ceiling. Yes, he says softly, but it hurts worse than I thought. Harold hesitates. They're expecting a funeral. They want the will read within the week. Edward nods. Let them. Tomorrow night we'll begin the next step. The firelight flickers across his face, revealing a mix of pain and grim determination. James dreaming of boardrooms and contracts. Ryan sleeping with a bottle in his hand. Claire still crying softly into her pillow. Meanwhile, Edward lies awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. His plan has worked. He's seen their true faces, but the cost feels heavier than he imagined. Tomorrow everything changes. The air is heavy, thick with anticipation and greed. The curtains are drawn, letting in only a dim gray light that casts long shadows across the oak-paneled walls. A single chandelier burns overhead, its light reflecting off the polished table where Harold sits with a leather folder before him. James, Ryan, and Claire sit in 3 chairs facing Harold. Victoria, the cousin-in-law who insulted Claire earlier, stands near the fireplace, arms crossed, smirking. No one speaks. Then Harold clears his throat. The reading begins. This is the last will and testament of Edward Marshall. Harold begins, his voice solemn. It was updated 2 weeks ago at Mr. Marshall's express request. James leans forward, his hands clasped tightly together. Ryan leans back, grinning smugly, twirling a pen like this is just another game. Claire sits stiffly, clutching a tissue. Harold continues, his tone carefully neutral. To my eldest son, James Marshall. James straightens. I leave nothing. Silence. James blinks, certain he misheard. Excuse me? Harold repeats slower this time. I leave nothing. For failing to show love beyond greed. James's face turns bright red. This is absurd, he snaps. This has to be a mistake. Harold ignores him and continues. To my youngest son, Ryan Marshall. Ryan stops spinning the pen, his grin faltering slightly. I also leave nothing. For recklessness, dishonor, and betrayal of trust. Ryan's mouth falls open. What? James rounds on Harold. You can't do this. I didn't do anything, Harold says calmly. Your father did. The shocking twist. Harold takes a deep breath and reads the next part. To my daughter, Claire Marshall. Claire's hands tremble as she clutches the tissue tighter. I leave the company, the mansion, and the remainder of my estate to her sole ownership and discretion. The room explodes. What? James leaps to his feet, slamming his fist on the table. That's impossible. She can't run the company. Ryan laughs bitterly. This is insane. She's been broke for years. What's she going to do? Sell the place and run off with some loser boyfriend? Shut up, Ryan! Claire shouts, her voice shaking but fierce. You don't get to tell me to shut up, Ryan fires back. You've been Dad's favorite since day one. He never gave the rest of us a chance. James steps toward Harold. I'm contesting this will. I don't care what it says. I built half this company. Victoria pipes up from the fireplace. Figures. The good little princess gets everything while the rest of us get scraps. This whole family is rigged. The shouting rises until Harold slams the folder shut. Enough, he bellows louder than anyone has ever heard him. The room goes silent. Your father wanted you to hear this, Harold says, his voice like a gavel. All of it. And he wanted you to face the truth about yourselves. The door creaks. Then a sound. A slow creak as the door to the study opens. Everyone turns. At first, it's just a shadow, tall and commanding, stretching across the floor. Then the sound of a cane tapping against the wood. Tap, tap, tap. The figure steps into the light. It's Edward, alive. Shock and chaos. The room freezes. Claire gasps, covering her mouth with her hands as tears flood her eyes. James staggers backward, nearly knocking over his chair. Ryan's jaw drops. What the? Victoria screams. Edward stands there, calm, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, as if he has not just risen from the dead. "Hello, family," he says evenly. For a moment, no one speaks. The only sound is the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then James explodes. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Edward steps forward, his cane striking the floor with each step. "This," Edward says, his voice deep and steady, "is not a joke. This is a test." The confrontation. He moves to the center of the room, looking each of them in the eye. "I have spent my life building this empire. I have given you every advantage, every opportunity. And yet, when you thought I was gone, what did you show me?" He points at James. "You thought only of contracts and control." He turns to Ryan. "You celebrated. You sold out your own blood to the highest bidder." Ryan's face burns red. "You spied on me." "I didn't need to," Edward says coldly. "You left a trail a mile wide. I know about the rival, the documents, the money you took." Ryan glares, but his shoulders slump in defeat. Edward turns last to Claire. His tone softens. "And you. You wept for me. Not for what I could give you, but for what we lost between us." Claire's lip trembles as tears roll down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispers. Edward nods slowly. "I know. The lesson." Edward turns back to the group. "This was never about money. This was about love, about character, about seeing who you are when you think no one is watching." James is still seething. "So you humiliated us? You faked your death just to make a point?" Edward's voice hardens. "If that's what it took to wake you up, then yes. Maybe now you'll understand that this family means more than dollars and shares." Ryan throws up his hands. "And what, I just get cut out completely?" Edward stares at him for a long moment. "You still have a chance to earn back my trust. But not today. Today you live with what you've done." Ryan looks away, shame finally cracking his defiance. The final blow. Edward looks to Harold. The will stands. Every word. Claire is now the majority owner of Marshall Industries. If James and Ryan want any part of it, they'll work under her supervision or walk away with nothing. James opens his mouth to argue, then stops. The fire in his eyes dims just enough to show he knows he's lost. Claire looks stunned. "Dad, I don't know if I can—" "You can," Edward interrupts gently. "And you will. You are the only one who remembers what this family was built on." No one speaks for several long seconds. Finally, James mutters, "This isn't over." He storms out, slamming the door behind him. Ryan lingers for a moment, looking at his father, then at Claire. "Guess you win," he says bitterly before leaving. Victoria shakes her head, disgusted, and stalks out after them. Now only Claire, Harold, and Edward remain. Claire wipes her tears, still in shock. Edward steps closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You earned this," he says softly. "Not because you're perfect, but because you remembered to care." Claire throws her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "I thought I lost you," she whispers. Edward closes his eyes, hugging her back. "You almost did." Edward looks toward the door where James and Ryan left, a shadow passing over his face. "This family isn't healed yet," he murmurs. "But maybe, just maybe, this is the start." The study is still vibrating with the echoes of shouting and the slam of the heavy oak door. For a long moment, no one moves. Claire is the first to break the silence. She turns to Edward, tears streaming down her cheeks, her breath coming in shaky gasps. You were alive this whole time," she whispers. Edward nods slowly. Claire throws herself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I thought I lost you. I thought—" Edward strokes her hair, his own eyes glistening. "I know, sweetheart, I know. But you never lost me. Not really." Harold quietly steps back, giving father and daughter space as Claire clings to Edward like a child. The sons return. The door creaks again. James and Ryan re-enter, faces red, humiliated, still burning with pride but too shaken to walk away completely. Edward turns to them, his expression calm but firm. "I didn't call you back in here to argue," he says. "I called you back because this is your last chance to hear me out." James folds his arms, trying to look defiant, but the tension in his jaw gives him away. Ryan kicks at the floor, suddenly looking far younger than his age. Edward straightens, standing tall despite the cane. "You two failed this test. When you thought I was gone, you revealed exactly who you've become, men who love money and power more than family, more than decency. And I will not let Marshall Industries fall into those hands." The words land like a hammer blow. James stiffens. "So what, you're cutting us off? Throwing away your own blood?" Edward's voice hardens. I am protecting this company and this family's name from your greed. As of this moment, neither of you have any controlling interest in Marshall Industries. Your board seats are revoked. Your signatures mean nothing. James's face twists. You can't do this. I can, Edward says, and I already have. Ryan steps forward, his voice cracking. Dad, please. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I was scared. I didn't know what else to do. Edward looks at him for a long moment. I know fear drove you, Edward says quietly, but fear doesn't excuse betrayal. Ryan lowers his head, shame washing over him. Edward gestures toward Harold, who hands him a small envelope. This, Edward says, is a trust fund. Enough to cover your debts and give you a chance to rebuild your lives honestly. If you can prove to me in the next 2 years that you are capable of living with integrity, of putting family first, then we will revisit your place in this company. James glares. And if we don't, Edward's voice is cold as marble. Then you walk away with nothing but the name Marshall on your gravestones. That's your choice. Ryan swallows hard, pocketing the envelope without a word. Claire's moment. Edward turns back to Claire. You, on the other hand, showed me the heart I hoped still existed in this family. You cried not for what you lost, but for me. For us. Claire's lip trembles. I didn't think I deserved anything from you, Dad. Not after all the distance between us. I just wanted you back. Edward takes her hands. And now you have me, and more than that, you have my trust. He turns to Harold. Effective immediately, Claire Marshall is the CEO of Marshall Industries. Claire's eyes widen. Dad, I don't know if I'm ready. Edward smiles faintly. No one is ever ready, but you'll learn, and you'll have me to guide you. This time, not just as a boss, but as a father. Claire's tears turn to a smile, radiant and relieved. James can't hide the bitterness on his face. So that's it? You crown the princess and toss the rest of us to the wolves? Edward's eyes flash. You tossed yourselves to the wolves the moment you put greed ahead of love. Ryan flinches but says nothing. Claire turns to her brothers, her voice soft but resolute. This doesn't have to be the end, she says. You can still be part of this family, but you have to choose to be better. James's expression wavers, but pride keeps him from answering. He turns and storms out without another word. Ryan lingers. His eyes meet Claire's for a moment, something unspoken passes between them. Then he mutters, "We'll see," and leaves. Father and daughter. The study is quiet again. Edward lowers himself into a chair, suddenly looking 10 years older from the weight of it all. Claire sits across from him, still processing everything. You really scared me, she says softly. I scared myself, Edward admits. Watching you cry over me, it almost broke me. But I had to know the truth. Claire leans forward. And now that you do, what happens next? Edward glances toward the door where James and Ryan exited. That depends on them, he says. I can't force them to change, but I can show them what change looks like. Claire nods slowly. Then let's start by fixing what we can. Edward smiles faintly, spoken like a real CEO. 1 week later, epilogue beat. James in his office, staring at the envelope, tearing up the resignation letter he was going to send to Harold. A flicker of determination crossing his face. Ryan in a rehab clinic, signing paperwork, a look of nervous resolve replacing his usual cocky grin. Claire in the boardroom, confidently addressing a group of executives as Edward watches proudly from the doorway. Later that evening, Edward and Claire walk through the garden together. The sky is painted gold with the last light of sunset. You know, Edward says, when I started this plan, I thought the biggest lesson would be for you 3 kids. Turns out, I learned something too. Claire looks at him curiously. What's that? Edward stops, gazing out over the city skyline. That love has to be nurtured and tested, but not manipulated. I nearly lost all of you because I thought I could force you to prove yourselves. Maybe if I'd been the father I should have been all along, I wouldn't have had to fake my own death to find out who cared. Claire squeezes his arm. Maybe this was the only way we'd ever face the truth. Edward nods slowly. Maybe so. He turns to Claire. What would you do, Edward asks softly, if you had to find out who really loved you before it was too late? He lets the question hang in the air before walking back toward the mansion with Claire, the golden light fading behind them. Edward turns toward the mirror, his voice quiet, almost confessional. In the end, he begins, love can't be bought and neither can loyalty. He pauses, glancing toward the mansion where faint laughter from the staff drifts through the air. For years I thought money was the glue that held my family together. I thought if I provided enough, if I gave enough, they would stay close to me. But money doesn't hold people. It pushes them. It tempts them. And sometimes it reveals the worst in them. He takes a slow breath, his cane tapping lightly on the stone path as he resumes walking. Sometimes, he continues, you have to lose everything, or at least make it look like you did, to find out who truly stands beside you. The ones who stayed, stayed because of love. The ones who left, left because of greed. Edward stops near the edge of the garden, where roses bloom despite the cool evening air. He bends slightly, plucking a single rose, twirling it in his fingers. This test I created, he says softly, wasn't just about my children. It was about me. I needed to face the truth I'd been avoiding, that somewhere along the way, I became a stranger in my own family. A man my children feared, resented, maybe even hated. He shakes his head. I thought staging my death would show me the truth about them, but what I didn't expect was the truth it showed me about myself. Claire steps into frame, joining him on the path. She doesn't speak at first, just slips her arm into his. The gesture is small, but the warmth in Edward's expression says everything. You taught me something, Claire, Edward says, looking at her. You reminded me that love isn't proven by grand gestures, but by quiet moments. The hand you held at my bedside, the tears you shed, those were worth more than any fortune I could leave behind. Claire smiles faintly, her own tears glistening. You taught me something too, Dad, she says softly. That sometimes we have to lose the father we thought we had, to finally meet the man he was all along. Edward lets out a shaky laugh, his chest rising with something between pride and sorrow. They walk further into the garden as twilight deepens, the last light fading to a soft purple glow. I don't know what the future holds, Edward says. I don't know if your brothers will change or if they'll walk away forever. But this much I know: tonight is the first night in a long time that I feel hope. He glances at her with a teasing smile. And maybe the company's finally in good hands. Claire rolls her eyes but laughs. The sound is light, musical, a stark contrast to the tension-filled house we saw just hours before. Edward turns to face the camera one last time, as though speaking directly to the viewer. If you're watching this, he says gently, ask yourself, who would still be at your side if tomorrow everything you owned disappeared? Who would stay if there was nothing left to gain? Those are the people worth keeping close. Those are the people worth fighting for. He lets the words sink in, his eyes locking with the lens as though he is daring the audience to reflect on their own lives. You know, Edward says with a small smile, for the first time in years I'm not thinking about the next deal or the next quarterly report. I'm just thinking about dinner. Claire laughs. Good, because I'm starving. Edward chuckles, his laughter warm and full. Then let's eat, he says simply. The two figures walk deeper into the garden until they are swallowed by the growing night. The final shot lingers on the rose Edward dropped on the path, a symbol of loss, renewal, and fragile beauty. Before the screen fades to black, love cannot be bought. Loyalty cannot be demanded. In the end, it is not what we leave behind that matters. It is who chooses to walk with us, even when there's nothing left to gain. What do you think? Was Edward right to test his family by pretending to be sick, or did he go too far? Some might say he was justified, that he had every right to know who loved him for who he really was, and not just for his fortune. Others might argue that faking a death is too extreme, that no lesson is worth putting your loved ones through that kind of heartbreak. What about James and Ryan? Do you think they deserve to be cut off, or should Edward have given them another chance to change before disinheriting them? And Claire, did she truly earn everything she received, or was she just in the right place at the right time? This is where we want to hear your voice. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think money reveals who people really are, or does it simply magnify what was already there? If you were in Edward's position, would you dare to pull off a test like this? Would you risk losing your family just to know the truth? And for those of you watching right now, think about the people closest to you. Who would still be by your side if you lost everything tomorrow? That question might be uncomfortable, but it's worth asking. We read every single comment, and we love seeing how you interpret these stories. So let's start a conversation. Do you side with Edward, with Claire, or maybe even with James and Ryan? Do you think there's a better way this story could have ended? If this story made you feel something anger, sadness, hope, hit that like button so we know you want more. It only takes a second, but it tells us this kind of storytelling matters. And if you love stories with twists, drama, and powerful morals that make you think long after the video ends, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have even more emotional, dramatic stories coming your way. Stories that will make you question loyalty, love, and what really matters in life. So what do you think? Was Edward a genius or a fool who almost lost everything? The debate starts now. We'll see you in the comments.